Audi TT Mark 1 3.2 V6, changing the oil pressure sensor.
Hi all, Andy here and welcome back to the channel where tonight I'm covering the changing of this. This is your oil pressure sensor on the 3.2 V6. Why I'm changing it I will cover in just one moment, but it's worth pointing out this looks to me like a bit of a pig of a job. So on the 225 and the 180, I think you can access this from above. It screws into the top of the oil filter by the look of it. Again, this does screw into just above the oil filter in the car, but you've got to take off a whole host of components to get access. The reason I'm looking to change this is the car is suffering with a low oil pressure sensor warning on the dash. You may have seen this one. It comes up with a red oil can with 3 beeps. Now I'm not going to bore you with the details behind mine doing this, but let's just say it's happened a couple of times. The car has got plenty of oil in it. I have just recently undertaken an oil change. It was doing this before the oil change, and the car does it intermittently. So I don't think it's a terminal thing, because if it was a real low oil pressure sensor, I think the car would now be dead. However, if you do get an oil pressure sensor light on the dash, the advice is to turn the car off and do not drive it and get it towed to a garage so they can take a look at it for you. I think oil pressure itself is fine, but I do think the gauge or the sensor on mine is faulty.
Here is a list of the tools that you need to undertake this job, including a photo of the removal spanner tool I had to fabricate to get access to the sensor. Difficulty for this was 4 out of 5, as I had to strip the car down significantly.
So I'm going to give you a step-by-step guide to what you need to remove to access this particular component and how you replace this and put it back together. For this particular job, I need access below and above the engine to get this component out. So what I need to do first is get the car on axle stands and get the car jacked up. So the first thing I'm going to remove is the under tray from the car. There is a separate video on removing the under tray, so I won't cover it in this one, but if you want to check out on how to remove the under tray on the 3.2 V6, click the video link above. According to the Bentley guide, removing the plastic cover around the water expansion tank, so let's do that first. Undo this plastic, screw at the back, remove the plastic around the expansion tank. And why are we doing this, you may add? Well, we need to get access to this particular part here, and we need to insert a bolt through this hole, tighten the bolt, which will allow us to slacken the belt off on the V pulley. It's important to also note the direction of the V pulley so you don't put it on the wrong way round when you put it back together. They suggest you mark it with a chalk mark. So you class this as the tensioner, and by inserting that bolt we've reduced it down. We can now slip that belt off. So I've disconnected the secondary air hose here as the next step, which is just to the right of the oil filler cap. I've disconnected because it's quite fiddly to show you down there, but the way that this fixture works is you pinch above and below, which widens it, which allows you to wiggle the secondary air hose out of position. So that needs to come apart so that we can lower the secondary air pump down shortly to access the oil sensor. You will also need to release it from this clip just here to allow it to drop down. Not the most flattering of poses, but I'm under the car now for the next stage, and I'm going to be removing this part here, which is around the side of the sump and around the power steering pump, and it's classed as the right hand side sound insulation. And to remove it, nuts that are located just up here. There's one, if you can see that, one just up there, there's one further back, seems to clip into the front bumper just here. So with the front suspension in the background, it gives you a good idea of whereabouts this is located. So it's almost in the front wheel arch, at the back of the front wheel arch. So with those two rusty nuts out of the way, so that literally just unclips at the front of the bumper there. So that is the driver's side sound suppression out of the way. It looks like this one's held in place with a clip rather than a screw, which is quite interesting.
I prised the teeth from this clip to lower the front rather than remove the whole panel, as the rear bolt was hidden behind a further panel connected to the headlight levelling sensor. This was not apparent on the diagram. However, you can leave this in place, as the reason you lower the front is to remove or lower the cross brace. I will mention that shortly.
So this sound suppression has now unclipped. What I need to access is the end of that cross member. And you can see there are 3 bolts in place. So all I need to do, 1, 2, 3. So I need to unbolt those from either side, and then I need to remove this cross member, which goes all the way, as you'd imagine, across the car.
There are 3 13mm bolts holding each side of the cross member in place, and you will need an extension bar for your socket wrench to reach them.
Don't forget, guys, when you're working under the car, there's going to be lots of dust, rust and rubbish falling down, so make sure you wear eye protection. Obviously I've got blue ones.
You will see here that the design of the cross member means that the lower radiator hose is stopping it from being totally removed. That's not a massive issue, as you can access all you need to on the driver's side of the engine bay, where that side of the bar has lowered and released. Now we get a look at the power steering pump on the right hand side of the lower engine. We need to remove the belt and unbolt the pulley wheel using an Allen key. You will need to stop the pulley wheel from turning with some form of screwdriver or plug spanner like I have.
It's locked against the sump so it can't turn, and then I can just break the tightness of these pulley bolts like that and like that, and then I can remove that, and these are just then finger loose, and there you go. So there's the pulley wheel off. I'm going to leave that belt again round that top, because I know that it goes round there and round there. And the pulley wheel, I know the writing and the Audi stamp need to go to the outside of the car for when I'm refitting. I'm going to just place the bolts through it as well, like so. And that way I also know which side the bolts go through. So we need to remove these bolts, remove the power steering pump. Need to undo this bolt here, undo this bolt here, and there's also one around here on the back to undo as well. Yeah, it's a 14. There's one out. This piece of metal had become bent down, was stopping me getting to that bolt, because on the diagram you can see that nice and clearly, that bolt. You can clearly see the power steering pump is now moving. Before I remove this last bolt, it did say to hang the power steering pump on the lock, which I think might be that black bar. We don't want to put the power steering pipes under any load or pressure. So I'm just being ready to catch the weight of this pump. Okay, so that's the pump off. Let's remove that out. I'm just going to hang it on that belt until I can find something to support it. So that's the secondary air pump that we need to remove. There's also this little bolt in here we need to remove, which is the bracket for the secondary air filter. Next we need to disconnect the electrical connector. So there's a little push. Let's lift the clip up, which then releases it. There you go. So the connector's out the way for the secondary air pump. I'm just going to undo these hoses, the bracket from these hoses, pull them to one side. I'm now going to undo this bolt to remove the bracket that holds the secondary air pump in place. So we'll give that a little squirt with penetrating fluid to loosen it up. And that's a case of removing the bolt that holds the secondary air pump bracket in place.
As is typical, the camera has not got the footage of me removing the air pump bracket that is screwed into the front of the sump with 2 hex key bolts. These came out easy, but the third is a pig. It is just visible if you shine a torch up through this hole, and you need a bigger hex key to remove the bolt. It's the next size up from the 2 on the sump. Use a long key to get some purchase from in front of the bolt and try and watch it engage through the hole. It took me a good 15 minutes to sort this.
So as you can see, I've had to resort to rather drastic measures. So I've also taken the majority of the front of the car off to get to this sensor, because the Bentley guide, which recommended removing those components from underneath, so the secondary air pump and also the power steering pump, to give you enough access to get to the components, you simply did not have enough arm room or wiggle room. You couldn't actually see the sensor, so you're going to have to do all of this blind. Before I removed the bumper and the slam panel, I could just about feed my arm through and feel the sensor, but it's bruised to death where I was wrestling all of these components. So I figured it would be better to take the entire front off, which I've done. And it's allowed me to be able to see the component in the car, and also align a spanner to get around it to remove it. So whereas the Bentley guide recommends a socket, I think trying to get a socket that's long enough to go over the sensor and clear the plastic, but short enough to give you any clearance and any movement would be almost impossible. So I have a solution. I'll talk about it more in a moment, but this is my patio heater spanner that I've altered that will allow me to hook around the sensor, give it a turn and remove it from the car. But there's the sensor right there. Now you can see, if I can just move that other sensor out of the way, there's plenty of scope around it to get a spanner on, but there's very little movement anywhere around to get the spanner going. So that's where the patio heater spanner that I've made comes in useful. The principle being it's bent around enough I can just manoeuvre that spanner into place, and you can see it is turning. Now I have loosened this off, so that's why it turns so easy, but the principle is it will go in there and you will be able to turn it when you're using 2 hands. So whereabouts am I going in to get that? So if you look down from the almost the V6 badge part, down here you can slot this spanner in above this black pipe. Again, it's not done up overly tight once you've broken the seal, but I can just spin that sensor with one hand. So after many nights of battling, here it is. Here's the new oil sensor, and here's the old oil sensor. So it's my thoughts that inside this hole it's going to be full of crudded up oil that's stopping this getting a good reading. So I'm going to give it a soak in petrol and see what comes out of it anyway. I've got the new one to go straight back on the car, which I'm going to fit, and hopefully that will cure the low oil pressure sensor warning I'm getting on the dash. So here's my little petrol experiment. I've got a little bottle with the top cut off as a stand. So I'm going to give that a little bob around in the oil and the petrol, see what comes out of it. So we'll leave that to soak for a while. Just clean petrol before we put that in there. That's the rubbish coming out. So here it is, the tool that I fabricated, which I call the Audi Charger pipe smoker spanner, because of the size of it. So all it is a patio heater spanner, which is 22mm, so no good for our 24mm oil sensor. And what I've done is I've taken an angle grinder and ground this out to 24mm, and I did that by using the new one as a guide to make sure it fits, like you can see it does. And the shape of it, I've bent it up further right at the neck of the spanner, bent it over further and then bent it almost parallel to the shape of the spanner. And the principle is you slot this in around the sensor like so when it's bolted in place, and there is a plastic sensor just here going off elsewhere in the car, but this will allow you at the angle, once it's tightened up, that you can just put something on the other side of the corner here, put some pressure and it turns. It's not under an awful lot of tension, this plug, when it's in place. So this spanner, bent to this specification, will bend around the other sensor that's in place, allow you to drop it over behind the oil pressure sensor and give it a turn, and it's clear of all the components. So that's it. All that work, one simple homemade spanner, and we're ready to go. There you go. So that's the car completely reassembled and the sensor changed, all thanks to my, what I'm going to class as the Andy Charger Pipe Smokers 24mm patio heater spanner. Catchy name. I'm going to take the car for a spin. Fingers crossed it's not going to break down on me after all that I've taken apart. I've never taken a car apart so much as I have with this car, so this is all new territory for me. Hopefully as well the oil pressure light issue has gone away. Let's take it for a spin and find out. Honestly, I'm so nervous about this. I've never ever taken a car apart this far before. I could have put a belt on the wrong way around, it could all blow up, so I'm hoping not. Turn the radio off. Here we go. I've got no errors on the dash, and the engine is running, and it hasn't blown up, so that's a good start. So we'll take you for a little spin and see what happens. Since going for that test drive, which was successful and I completed about 15 miles, I've since taken the car out for around a further 45, and the good news is there has been no warning light whatsoever. So that's great news, I'm really pleased about that. I did have concerns that there was more going on than just the sensor, but it appears to be it was just that at fault. If you too get this warning light on your dashboard, please do not ignore it, and also turn off your engine and seek help before driving any further. Please don't presume it's just the sensor like on my car. It could be far worse for your engine. So what have I learned from this video? Well, I would say the Bentley Manual that gave me the tips on how to remove everything from underneath the car will only get you so far. You do still need to remove those components at the top of the car so you can access the sensor and visibly see it. I think it would be nigh on impossible to use feel and touch alone to get this sensor out. People have mentioned about putting a long socket over that, but there's no way that you're going to get a bar on top of that, particularly if you're doing it blind, to get this particular component off. If you've got an angle grinder to hand, you could cut a long socket down to just the right height of this particular sensor and get a bar on the top, and that might also be able to get you out of trouble. But for the sake of using my patio heater idea, I would do that. So it's a combination of the Bentley Manual and good old taking the front off the car. So I hope that helps you when you too are trying to change your oil sensor. I've not found any other videos on the Mark 1 TT 3.2 oil sensor change anywhere on YouTube, so perhaps this will help someone out that is looking for it. If you like what you've seen today, then please do give this video a thumbs up, and also think about subscribing to my channel, where you'll find a whole host of content on the Audi TT Mark 1. Not only the 3.2 V6, but also my 225 Roadster. In fact, here's a few selected videos on the side that you too may want to have a look at. As always, thanks for watching today and see you soon. Take care.